I'm honored to be here for these 2 days of planning and plotting of how to combat all the systemic ills that affect our society. Muhammad Ali and the Ali Center have a special place in my heart. One of the greatest honors I ever had was to be asked to give a toast at Muhammad Ali's 70th birthday. I said, Muhammad, you and Nelson Mandela were the two people that I was lucky enough to know who, if a crowd saw them, they would be magnetized and drawn right to them. When I saw the two of you in a room together at different ends of the room, those crowds went to you. And Mr. Mandela said to me, that's the way it should be. Two giants who used the power of sport to effect positive social change, to begin the process of reforming our society and changing it. We meet now in 2021 and everything is different. For 50 years, if an athlete stepped forward and had the courage to take a bold step, they were crushed by society around them. Think of Carlos and Smith in Mexico City, Muhammad Ali in the Vietnam War, Kurt Flood standing up for players' rights. In 2016, when Colin Kaepernick took the knee, I said to my wife, he'll never play again after this season, and sadly, that was correct. The pro sports world crushed athletes who had the courage to speak up. Society crushed athletes who had the courage to speak up. But now the tide has turned. The murder of George Floyd began to change everything. When the Bucks walked off the court in the middle of the bubble last year, it was the most important act of athlete activism that I had seen since Ali in the 60s and Carlos and Smith. It wasn't just the Bucks, of course. It was the entire league, the Players Association, and every other sport decided that they could not play as long as police brutality continued in this country. This was right after the shooting in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Those athletes stood tall. It reminded me of a time that in 1977 I was in Lusaka in Zambia with a man named George Hauser, who was my mentor. It was an anti-apartheid conference. And I asked George, who was an amazing civil rights leader, he was on the first Freedom Ride in 1944. He founded the Congress of Racial Equality. He spent 2 years in prison as a conscientious objector. He founded the anti-apartheid movement and anti-colonial movements. I said, George, do you think we'll ever live to see the day when South Africa, Namibia, and as it was called then, Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, would be free? George said to me, Rich, I feel it in my gut that we will see that. There was no way that he could have been right at this particular time. Mandela was 12 years away from being released. Apartheid was at its height. And on May 10th, 1994, I stood with George Hauser on the steps of the Union buildings as Nelson Mandela's guest as he became the new president of what had been the most racist regime on the face of the earth in the second half of the 20th century. I feel it in my gut right now that this time is a time of inflection, that change can be sustained. I think millennials and Generation Z have bigger social consciences than anyone before. They have the technology to capture history so that it can't be denied and rewritten by authorities. They have the communications abilities through social media to spread the messages quickly. And most of all, from my point of view, they have athlete activism. There's no doubt in my mind that athletes are here to stay and use their power to fight for social change. Athlete activism feels good, it is good, it will be a force to be delivered. It's the most diverse workplace in the country on our playing fields in the three major men's sports, the WNBA and the National Women's Soccer League, and those athletes are mobilized. They've been asked about things that athletes were never asked about before. We used to ask them about their injuries and can they play on Saturday night. Now we ask them about criminal justice and health care and education and housing, things that are important. They're being treated as multidimensional human beings, sometimes for the first time. Yesterday, of course, was a historic day in the National Football League as the first NFL player said he was gay, joining Billy Beane in baseball, Jason Collins, and of course Billie Jean King so many decades ago. We are in the midst of change. Use these days to plot how we're going to fight to bring about more freedom and more justice and more equity for people not only in the United States but around the world. Good luck with everything you're going to do. It will be a rich time. I'm honored to.
Well, excellent. Oh, it's just really powerful to have Dr. Lapchick's words to help us with our transition from our athlete panel to our stakeholder panel. And at this point, I'm really honored, really grateful to have our two moderators, Dr. Joseph Cooper from the University of Massachusetts in Boston, and also Dr. Jennifer McGarry from the University of Connecticut. We'll be turning it over and really looking forward to this next conversation and sort of building the momentum of our forum today. So over to you, Joey and Jenny.
Thanks so much. Everyone, good afternoon. Very excited to co-moderate this outstanding panel that we have around stakeholders. So we all just heard from athletes and their perspectives, some current, some former, but we know that the power to ignite social change through sport extends beyond those who wear the uniforms. It also connects to sports persons who are connected to the industry in various ways, whether it be as scholars, as coaches, as media personnel, and all forms of advocates, allies, and activists. So very excited to get started with you all this afternoon. I will hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Jennifer McGarry, for her introductions, and then we will briefly introduce all of our panelists before we get into our questions.
Thanks, Joey, and thanks, Eli, and to the whole Muhammad Ali Center. It's exciting to be here again this year and to see some familiar faces, but also to meet some new folks. So looking forward to getting started. Actually, we were going to do just really briefly around the room with the panelists and have them just say a few words of introduction about themselves. We know that folks have access to their more extended bios, but just a name and the organization that you're with, and then we'll come back to start the first question. And I'll ask Sarah to go first, and then Sarah, if you wouldn't mind passing it off to the next panelist when you're finished, that would be great, and we'll just go around that way.
Sure, you got it. Well, thank you for having me today. I'm excited to be here, and likewise, pleased to see some familiar faces and meet new folks as well. My name is Sarah Axelson, pronouns are she, her. I am Vice President of Advocacy with the Women's Sports Foundation. And at WSF, I oversee all efforts around our gender equity and advocacy work. So very pleased to be here today. I've been a lifelong athlete. Softball was my sport growing up, but certainly have expanded that into other sports and hobbies into the rest of my adult life. But thank you for having me today. I will pass it off to Joanne.
Joanne needs to find the unmute button. Sarah, thank you. I'm a huge fan of the work that the Women's Sports Foundation does, and it's just an honor to be here today. I have spent many years working in men's professional sports, ran philanthropy for the Golden State Warriors. Prior to that, the San Francisco 49ers for about a decade, and started my career with Special Olympics at their global headquarters in Washington, D.C. The continuing theme for me has always been about helping people to amplify their voices to inspire change. And in seeing where there might be voices that feel or are marginalized, how can we help them to open those doors and to lift it up so that others can follow them. I launched Oliver+Rose about 1.5 years ago now, which is focused on the intersection between social responsibility in corporates for athletes and influencers and with nonprofits, that they can all work together to create more momentum around the causes that matter most to them. And as part of that, launched Athletes' Voices, which we just successfully completed our first season of the Pitch for Change speaker series, where we covered topics as broad-ranging as voter suppression and voter rights to gun control and violence in our communities, green sports, mental health. And the hypothesis was that we could prove that athletes can and should be able to speak up and speak out on any topic that matters to them, regardless of what you might presuppose they should be speaking on, that we could provide that forum and showcase their ability to do so. I'm a retired figure skater and have spent, as I said, my career working with a lot of very large men, but they respect me and I respect them. and we all share the same injuries at the end of the day. So with that, I'm going to pass it along to Collin.
Thanks, Joanne. Good afternoon, everyone. Collin Williams, author, educator, and researcher who really is interested in the intersections of race, diversity, as well as sport and education. In many ways, I am an educator who sort of slipped his way into a role with the Baltimore Ravens, thinking about player engagement, and then transitioning to the NBA. Currently, I serve as a senior director of curriculum with RISE, a 501c3 national nonprofit that uses sport as a way to address issues of social justice, particularly those around race. In my role, I spend a lot of time designing the curriculum, both virtual, in person, as well as digital, online modules, and then doing a lot of facilitation with our high-profile partners. Pleasure to be here with everyone, as well as a big fan of many other folks on the panel. So I'm going to pass it over to Hudson.
Thanks, Collin. And hey, everybody. My name is Hudson Taylor. My pronouns are he, him. I am the founder and executive director of Athlete Ally. Athlete Ally works to end homophobia and transphobia in sport. And really the three things that we really focus on are LGBTQ education, who needs to be educated that isn't, sport policy reform, how do we make the policies of sport really reflect the full diversity of people who are trying to access sport, and then third, athlete activism, how do we help engender a world in which athlete activism is both more accepted and hopefully more expected. Proud to be able to do this work in partnership with so many of the other panelists and folks who are joining this conference. So yeah, looking forward to the discussion. Damion.
Hi, my name is Damion Thomas. I am the curator of sports at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, where I also lead the Sports and Race Initiative. At the museum, we try to use sports as an entry point to larger political, social, and cultural histories. And I really see the gallery at the museum as a way to tell African American history through the lens of sports. And I'll pass to Ms. Toussaint.
Thanks, Damion. Hello, everyone. My name is Pharlone Charity Toussaint, and I am the newest member of the We Coach team. I'm going to put that in the chat so you can see it, because it's very important that you know. I was on this panel or a similar panel last year representing the Laureate Sport for Good Foundation, still family and friends of mine, but I am now the newest member of this team that will become the Center for Healing and Justice Through Sport. I am the Director of External Affairs and also an angelic troublemaker. So I'm excited about being on the line with all of you today and stirring up the pot and making some trouble for all of us. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks everyone for your introductions. We have good energy going already. So troublemaker, Pharlone, we're gonna start with you, and everybody will have a chance to answer this first question. Can you tell us how you and or your organization have leveraged the political power of athletes and or sport in driving systemic change? And the second part of the question is if you could highlight some major wins that you or your organization has had in driving systemic change.
Sure. I set myself up for that, didn't I? I think, you know, the very easy answer to this is, you know, if you're familiar with the Laureate Sport for Good Foundation, a lot of the work that is done there is almost centered around athlete voice, athlete power, their pedestal. Nelson Mandela was at the first Laureate Sports Awards, where they were leveraging the power of athletes to tell the truth about, you know, how sport has the power to change the world, has the power to bring hope where there was once despair, right? That's the cute answer, you know, that I can share with you all day. The truth is that I actually don't think that sport and athletes have been leveraged to make any real significant impact. And the truth is, you know, I believe that my work at the Center for Healing and Justice Through Sport is going to bridge that gap truly, because those two areas don't really actually interact. They don't really communicate, right? Grassroots organizing and mobilizing and advocacy are almost a world away from the sports industry and the glitz and the glamour and the power and influence. And I think that, you know, there are lots of like nice things that have happened that can be associated as wins, right? But like the conditions of people's lives have not gotten better, actually, right? And so in my hope, it's, you know, really bridging the gap between organizers and activists, and really making sure that when athletes have that pedestal and have that power to walk off the court or stop playing, that they can call an activist and say, what are our demands? What needs to be done right now so that like I can feel good about showing back up to work? And I think that just hasn't happened yet because there hasn't been a resource, a place for athletes and sports properties to go to really bridge that gap. So that's my troublemaker answer. I hope I didn't mess up anybody else's.
No, I think it's really important to keep things real and to share your perspectives. And you know, we're asking this question as what have the wins been? But it's important to say if there haven't been wins too. So I appreciate that honesty. Damion, would you like to take the next crack at this question, please?
Sure. I'm a historian by training, and I believe the history is power. And the way history has traditionally been told in American history is that we're moving from progress to progress, and all of the conflict and all of the alternative perspectives are kind of written out of the winner's history. And so what we try to do at the museum is to really share American history through an African-American lens. And what that means for me as a historian is that what we have to do is to place sports within a larger social, political, and cultural conversation. And by doing that, we're able to bring different people into the conversation who might not be interested in African-American history, who might not think it has any relevance to them, but their favorite players might be Jackie Robinson or Michael Jordan. And so what we're able to do is to take those histories and demonstrate how they connect to individuals' lives and important social phenomena. Heretofore, we've had over 7 million people come into the museum, and we hope that we are a place that sparks people to learn more and to see that sports matter and that they matter far beyond the playing field.
Thank you so much for that reply. Hudson, would you like to take the first question?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So Athlete Ally, basically, I'm a big believer that if athletes speak in one voice, they can move mountains. You look at the whole industry of sport, and it's a $1 billion plus industry built on the labor of very few people. The TV deals, the ticket sales, nothing actually happens if the athletes don't play. So I think the entire silencing of athletes, if athletes speak in one voice, the people have to listen. So for Athlete Ally, the way in which we've really tried to think about this is how do we both educate athletes and help organize them to affect strategic specific change, primarily internal to sport. So again, for Athlete Ally, we're trying to look at what are those policies and practices which are negatively impacting the LGBTQ community in sport. Probably one of our biggest, I guess, quote unquote wins or campaigns that we launched was called the Principle 6 campaign. So heading into the Sochi Winter Olympics, you have the Olympic values and principles on one hand. You have the Winter Olympics being held in Russia, a country with overt anti-gay propaganda laws. So we launched a campaign where we got hundreds of Olympic and Paralympic athletes to come together, say that Principle 6 of the Charter put the onus on the IOC to ensure that there was a discrimination-free environment. That campaign resulted in sexual orientation getting added to the non-discrimination clause of the Olympic Charter and built into the bidding process for all future games. So I was I should say at the time, Athlete Ally didn't even have office space. So it just felt oh my gosh, if athletes just get together and speak in one voice, people are going to listen to you. People are going to write about it. People are going to talk about it. So I think we've tried to replicate that in lots of other, big and small ways. Probably most recently, one of our Athlete Ally chapters, group of college athletes organized an open letter to the NCAA, calling on them to remove championships from any states that have passed some of these anti-trans sport bills. That letter was signed by over 500 current NCAA athletes. So while we haven't yet got to the win of that, it certainly elicited a response from the NCAA. It started a conversation, and that drumbeat continues, because for any sport governing body, their constituency is their athletes. And so again, if we can get the athletes to say or demand, hey, this needs to get done, at least there's a conversation that I think can move towards a win.
Thank you so much. Good examples to share with us. Definitely some wins, and maybe a win in the making with the NCAA example. Collin, would you like to take a stab at the first question, please?
Absolutely. So I think one of the things we want to start the conversation when we think about RISE is that we're an organization whose focus is race, but our sort of goal is education, right? So when you think about our mission, RISE educates and empowers the sport community to champion social justice, eliminate racial discrimination, and improve race relations, right? We are not a political organization. In fact, we consider ourselves nonpartisan. However, we do encourage athletes to use their voice and leverage the platform of sport, right? So when we think about political power and voting, it's really framed around the concept of civic engagement. And at RISE, when we think about civic engagement, it's really acting to address issues of public concern by developing the combination of knowledge, skills, and values to make a difference, right? So then the work that we do at RISE is really focused around providing that knowledge, as well as helping people discover and delve into those values. So the work that we do, right, though ending racial discrimination and improving race relations sound like really lofty goals, the work that we do is really centered around our interactive and our dynamic programming, right? And what that programming does is allows people to understand a lot of the concepts, right, that we're talking about, really understand how to identify racism, why it's prevalent, and how to have conversations in ways that are positive and productive. The other thing that we do is, as we sort of develop that knowledge, we're also building skills, and the skills that we build are around leadership. So while we are experts around race, as we're developing athletes and others as leaders, right, the skills like conflict resolution, reflection, perspective taking, inclusive leadership, right? All of those skills are things that folks can apply to any other sort of areas or subjects that they might be passionate about, right? So I'm an advocate for women's health. I'm an advocate for LGBTQ rights, right? Whatever that might be, I can take the skills that I've learned from our curriculum and apply that elsewhere. And then to address the second part of the question around the wins, I would say for us, we've got nearly 500 partners, right? When we think about multi-year partnerships with major sports organizations, from the collegiate space to the pro sports space, right, where we're deeply engaged, where we're not just working with coaches or just with athletes, where we're also working with referees, we're working with cheerleaders, right, really sort of providing education throughout the sport industry to fans, to participants, to stakeholders, so that we can have the conversations and sort of be more prepared and be more intentional in our decision making.
Thank you, Collin. I appreciate the insights into your organization and the ways in which education leads, the transferable skills that folks that work with you get and learn, how that translates into systemic change. We're going to go with Joanne next, and then Sarah to bring up the end on question number 1.
It's interesting. I tend to approach things a little bit differently, but I like to reflect back to who we all were when we were very, very young, and the environment that we were brought to and what we were expected to be, and how people put these expectations on our shoulders. And, when I was very little, I always wanted to raise my hand in class. I felt like I knew the answer and I should share it. But in the classroom, that was not something that was as well received. But on the sports field, or in my case on the ice, that was what I was supposed to do. The harder I went after it, the more accolades I received, and I felt like the truest sense of myself. And so I think for athletes' voices, the biggest win this year has been helping to identify that athletes can dig deep and be their truest selves without needing to fit into the mold of what they were told they should be. And also working on that transition as they bridge from their identity as a pro athlete to their identity, period. And knowing that the mental health challenges that come when you lose that sense of self because you're one of the best in the world at something, and now you are trying to figure out what you're going to be the best in the world at next, instead of looking at it and saying, my journey is taking me through this path. And, you know, Hudson, the work you're doing at Athlete Ally is among the most important work that we have right now, period, because it's saying out loud in so many different venues, you get to be who you are, and you get to be an awesome athlete, and you get to show up and win and kick butt and just get it done. And if we can take that same application and apply it to athletes using their voices and give them the credibility, the credence, the support that they need to also make mistakes along the way, just like we do in sport, then we're going to make it a more welcoming environment overall for athletes to stand up and say, I believe in something. So for me, I think the biggest win has been that we've created a framework where athletes will be able to come in, think through and go through an exploration process to figure out what causes they might want to elevate, and then to give them the playbook that helps them to actually work through that so that they can see this really bright light that will enable them to lift others up, but also be who they're always meant to be.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Great. So the Women's Sports Foundation was founded by Billie Jean King in 1974. And I think it was pretty clear from the start to Billie that if she was at the top of her game, people would listen to her and she could use that platform for social change. And so it is very much ingrained in who we are as an organization to utilize athletes and their platforms to further the message of gender equality in sports. And we exist to make sure that all girls and women can reach their full potential in sport and in life. And we regularly use our elite and champion athletes to help spread the message, right? So making sure that we're working with those champion athletes, educating them, right? Educating them about the issues and helping to inform, but really leaning on them and their platform to help spread the message. And I think one of the great examples of utilizing champion athletes is National Girls and Women in Sports Day. So every year we, organize National Girls and Women in Sports Day. There are grassroots events across the country, but the Women's Sports Foundation, oftentimes alongside partner organizations, will go to Capitol Hill and have meetings on the Hill with members of Congress and their staff. But we bring our champion athletes along because what we realized a long time, prior to me ever starting with the Women's Sports Foundation, but we know that having the athletes with us opens doors and takes people's guards down, right? So being able to start those conversations by showing an Olympic gold medal, by passing that around the table, really has helped start the conversations and focus on the importance of sport, and why we need to make sure that all girls and women have access to sport. And in terms of wins, I think oftentimes when you're in the thick of it, it feels like the social justice work just moves at such a snail's pace. And so we need to remind ourselves to find the wins as much as we can. But one of the things, I won't call it a win yet, but I think something that is really hopeful that I certainly think that we will see some changes come out of is what we've seen most recently with the NCAA championships. So we very clearly saw women athletes in the NCAA system speaking out, using their platforms, using their voices to call out the inequities that they saw. And the Women's Sports Foundation very quickly also chimed in, right? We released statements, we had conversations with decision makers behind the scenes to say, what went wrong and how do we make sure that this does not happen ever again? And so we called for a review, others called for a review. The NCAA currently has a gender equity review underway, and we expect the first phase of that report to come at the end of July. And so we right now have a sign-on opportunity for individuals and organizations to join us in making sure that the results of that review are transparent and actionable. And then the next step will be making sure that when those findings and recommendations are released, that it doesn't end there, that we take that and turn that into full systems change, right? We need to disrupt this system and make sure that whatever was in place that allowed what we saw in March and then subsequent championships after that, right? Whatever was in place that allowed that to happen, that we change those systems so it doesn't happen again. And so I will fall short of calling it a win, but I think we all remain very hopeful that, as unfortunate as the inequities that we saw with basketball and then subsequently with, you know, softball, lacrosse, other volleyball, golf, right? We saw a number of sports using their voice to call out what they saw at their own championships. I think we remain very hopeful that this will result in very meaningful change. So not calling it a win, but definitely looking forward to seeing that report and making sure we can turn it into some change.
Thanks to all of you for your answers to that first question. Appreciate the examples. It seemed to me to flow through all of each of what you said, that power comes through education, through sharing your perspective, through recognizing others' perspectives, and then ultimately the collective voice that I think each of you spoke to as respective to your organizations. One thing that I think you all also recognize is that using that collective voice or even your individual voice doesn't always meet with a positive reception. So curious in the second question, if you could speak to how your organizations deal with or face, navigate even backlash to your systemic change efforts. And we're just going to go reverse the order. So we'll start with Sarah and then go to Joanne second.
Sure. So I would say backlash probably feels strong, as a strong word. But for the Women's Sports Foundation, I would say that the key for us is making sure that we remain true to who we are and making sure that we have the research and facts to back up what we are saying and what we are advocating for. So research, we have such a strong and robust history of research throughout our organization's lifetime, and that remains true to this day, that everything we do is grounded in a foundation of our research and utilizing research of others. And I think one really good example of maybe some pushback that we got that we then said, okay, maybe we need to reassess, is a few years back, there were a number of high profile firings and contract non-renewals of women coaches, right? And so these were usually successful women coaches. They often had raised concerns about gender equity at their school. And suddenly they, made too much money or were too harsh on their players and the contracts weren't getting renewed. And, to us, it seemed very clear that there was something systemic and potentially some gender bias going on that led to a number of these decisions happening across multiple campuses. But what happened was that somebody asked one of our team members at the time and said, is this really a systemic thing, or could this just be a few bad apple athletic directors who are making poor decisions, right? And so to us, having been in this space and having talked to coaches, across the country, we felt deeply that we knew the answer to that, but the fact remained that we didn't actually have the research to back it up. And so from that question, we actually set out to do a research report, and from that released Beyond X's and O's Gender Bias in Coaches of Women's College Sports. So that research allowed us to say with actual data and facts that there is gender bias in coaches of college women's sports, right? And the bias usually remained with the gender of the coach, not the gender of the team. So men who were coaching women, understood bias and experienced bias differently than women who were coaching women. So I think just for us, to sum it up for us, I think the research and facts and having that data to really fall back on and be able to explain and have conversations with folks who may not agree with us off the bat is really, really critical to countering that pushback.
Yeah, Sarah, I mean, that's spot on. And one of the things I love about Women's Sports Foundation, RISE, and others is the use of data. And the data supports the continuation of the programs that we've staked our careers on. But one of the transitional things that I've seen happening over the last 20 years is it used to be that sponsorships were, they came in, I would get a knock on the door and they'd say, hey, Joanne, we've sold this sponsorship deal. We have Symetra, they're coming in. They're going to be the official banker. They want to do appearances with players and with mascots and whatever, go to the school and do this. And that was good enough. But as we have seen that consumer behavior is actually tying back to what the social responsibility platforms are of those products, the standards seem to be changing about what a company is expected to do. Now, what we're experiencing right now and what I've experienced through my career is that the ramifications of standing up for what you believe in have been harsh, have been immediate, and have been long lasting. Dr. Lapchick referenced that in his comments that they showed right before this. But right now, it is scary to stand up and say, this is who I am, this is what I believe in, this is what I stand for, because the evidence is showing that the harder you go after something in certain sports, the more likely it is that your career will be derailed as a result, or that contracts will be taken away, marketing opportunities, and the opportunity for you to generate revenue or brand affinity as an individual athlete is at risk. And so as we are continuing to walk this path, it's heartening to me when I see the evidence out there. Hudson, I'm sure you saw this, but the #1 jersey yesterday by Fanatics, like awesome. Michael Sam's was the #1 jersey a few years ago as well. I love that we are now able to point to some data points that say, like last year, Colin Kaepernick's jersey, the #7 all black limited edition, sold out before it even hit the stores. And he's not even on a team, as we all know. So when we can start to show that companies that lean in and support these initiatives because there's revenue generation behind it, but also because it's the right thing to do, it can't just be the right thing to do. There also has to be that business opportunity behind it. And that will start to turn the tide, because right now, many sports organizations, and the ones that I was in included, had to take a step back, or did take a step back, to say, if we take a stance on this, how will it affect us in the long run? What's going to happen as a result? And Damion, I had the great honor of going with the Warriors and being a part of an incredible event when we were not invited to the White House, and we thought about something we could do to uplift and to be more positive. And the reception we received after visiting as a team the Smithsonian and the History Museum and saying something positive further encouraged that continued behavior within the NBA, within our team, and within our ownership group. So that's for me, I think it's just continuing to build off of the data that some of your organizations pull together so beautifully, and amplifying that to show how teams, leagues, and owners can still generate revenue, and maybe even more, when they're doing the right thing.
Thanks so much for that. I'm going to go to Collin next.
Thanks, Jennifer. So really appreciated what both Sarah and Joanne had to say around this question. And I think in many ways, while sort of that bottom line justification, the data, right, are helping folks sort of better understand why some of the decision-making processes play out the ways that they do, what I've also found is that for us, and I would do what Sarah did and sort of dial backlash a little bit and sort of say pushback or resistance to, is that they don't feel it, right? When folks don't feel something, when folks can't connect, when folks don't understand, when they believe they're exempt from a situation, a scenario, a societal ill, right? It doesn't resonate in the same ways, right? So folks may not be able to connect with an issue because no one in their families had cancer. So they don't know what that's like. But if they do, all of a sudden they hear that story and it resonates. And now they feel like they're a part of, that they feel like they have a place in the fight, some autonomy, right? And for us, we really do that with our curriculum, right? So even like the concept of bias, there's so many times where I walk into a room and folks sort of talk about, oh, I'm not biased. I'm able to see people for who they are. I'm not concerned about gender or sex or sexual orientation or race or eye color here, whatever those things might be, right? And then we get into some of our curriculum. And then we provide something that shows, we say, here's a challenge. Go ahead and solve this challenge. And then folks realize that they weren't able to solve it because their mind is stuck on rules that they got in kindergarten around connecting the dots or coloring it inside the lines, right? And then they realize this is a socialization problem. And these are things that we have to sort of unlearn. So for us to even begin that conversation, we start at the place where, hey, these things that we have that are a part of us naturally, they aren't our fault, right? These are things that we were taught by society. These are things that we've learned, but now we have to sort of recognize them and not be ashamed, but really lean into those things and embrace them. And when we do that, right, and do our curriculum and provide folks the space to sort of be honest and confront some of these negative messages for the first time, right, in a way that's non-judgmental, right, that really starts the conversations and opens up their eyes. And then it becomes, wow, I am biased. And wow, I do have privilege, but privilege isn't a bad thing. And it provides me an opportunity to assist someone else and to provide access and resources. And then we sort of shift the paradigm, right? And really sort of starting with that heart piece and sort of empower folks to say, I, based upon my college education, based upon the spaces, the identities that I occupy in this world, can positively impact and do something. So rather than sort of shying away from the conversation or sort of to silence it, I'm now going to be an active participant in it. And what can I do with this power that I have, in particular in this space, right? The power of sport, the platform that they're provided.
Very, very well said. Hudson, would you like to take it from here?
Yeah. So I think whenever we are dealt with, I'll use the word friction. Maybe there's a spectrum of friction, right? From backlash to hesitancy, resistance, right, and everything in between. And I really think that whenever that occurs, there's two things that are misaligned. Either we are not properly articulating why a person should care about the thing that we're talking about, or we're misaligned on what we want them to do about it. Maybe you agree, hey, this is a problem, but you disagree on the action that we're calling for, or maybe you agree with or you just don't agree that this is a problem at all, or that they shouldn't care about it. So I think generally when there is that friction, I always look at those two things to say, oh, okay, like we're missing the mark somewhere on articulating a why that is compelling or a what that feels actionable and right. And for me, I think that why is audience dependent in some ways. As much as I would like everybody to be on the same page as to why they should be supporting, letting trans kids play sports, it's the why is going to be different from audience to audience, right? What makes a person feel makes the light switch click on and that they get it is going to be different. Joanne, you mentioned sort of the market piece of it, right? The spending power of the LGBTQ community and the sort of business case, right? There are many, many people where that's the why that we're going to need to articulate to remove certain resistance. For other audiences, it's going to be a very different why. I also think that the messenger really matters. So, I am a white, heterosexual, cisgender man. There is a certain audience that I can appeal to that will remove some of that friction, remove some of those barriers. There are other audiences where I am not the right person. And so I think it's also being really thoughtful about choosing the right message and choosing the right messengers to like, again, analyze where are our roadblocks here? Who do we need to convince or change their behavior? And let's make sure we're getting the right people in front of those folks saying the right things. And then the last thing that I'll just say, I think in all this work is, I think that vulnerability is really important and it matters. I think like if that, like, mistakes are made, we're all trying to do our best in this work. And I think that if there's ever a moment where I feel like we didn't do our best, or we didn't, you know, I just feel like it's also really important to own that sometimes and to say that. And it can be really tricky to find the right words or the way to say it, but I think that that vulnerability is also really helpful when there is that friction, or where is that misalignment. It's like, hey, I'm sorry, like we're talking past each other here. And I think that's because I presented this in a way that clearly misunderstands where you're coming from, or whatever it might be. So those are some of my friction thoughts.
We appreciate that. Damion, would you like to add to the conversation here?
Sure, I think there have been some great responses. What I'd like to say about what we try to do at the Smithsonian is really add historical context to contemporary questions. And so what we try to do is help people grapple with the question, how did we get here? As a national museum, we're often asked to weigh in on many controversial issues surrounding race, and in my case, surrounding sports. And what we try to make sure is that our perspectives are grounded in the best research. One of the things we've also found to be quite helpful is that when we anticipate that there's going to be pushback, or that an issue is going to be controversial, we'll actually write our responses before that pushback comes, because we want to make sure that we are speaking to our values, to why we took these actions, why we have these beliefs, so that we're not always just being responsive to the narrative that someone else is providing.
Thank you for that. Pharlone, we're back to you. We've come all the way back around.
Yeah. So really quickly, Collin, it sounds like you've been to one of our trauma-informed trainings. Let me find out that you are familiar with the neurosequential model, because your comment about like the brain and how like really these are things that have been implanted in us and nurtured in us and taught to us. I think it's a really valid and important point to make sure that like it echoed across everything that everyone said here, and just want to pinpoint that there is research backed information about how that ends up showing up in our bodies and in the way that we behave. I think the only thing I want to add to this is to quote my colleague Megan Bartlett, and the co-founder of the center. Backlash comes from when people don't feel seen or heard or want to be included, right? And so in my strong opinion, I think that we should actually use backlash as a portal into community. We should use backlash as a portal into deeper communication, rather than shying away from the wiggly and uncomfortable feelings that come with someone not necessarily agreeing with us. I believe that we should actually encourage and support and egg it on. I think that backlash might be the portal that you need to innovate. The backlash you might get is what you need to elevate, right? And so I actually think we should lean right into that discomfort and own that. So that's all I'll add to that.
Some really wonderful answers here. The references to data and research as a way to support your perspectives, the process of needing to unlearn assumptions that have become part of our daily being throughout our lives. And I really appreciate what Damion had to say about proactively thinking about what are the questions and the challenges going to be to the work that we're trying to do. And then to kind of cap it off, Pharlone, with, and how are we going to engage folks that don't see things the way that we see them in order to make that kind of change that you're all working for? So thank you. I know my colleague Joey Cooper has been waiting to get into this conversation, so I'm going to turn it over to him for the next question.
Thank you, everybody. The responses thus far have been very insightful. And for question number 3, and also just we wanted to be mindful of time, what we did was we assigned question 3 to 3 of the panelists and question 4 to 3 other panelists. So for question 3, this one is directed towards Joanne, Hudson, and Collin, specifically with your organizations. Given the different ways and methods social change can be pursued, what methods of activism and/or advocacy do you feel are the most effective, and under what conditions? So we'll start with you, Joanne.
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think at the end of it, it's always about authenticity and what moves you in the moment. But having this playbook and knowing why you're going to approach this issue and knowing what your end goals are and working from, you know, the end goal back to the beginning, it will enable you to empower that message in a way where people can listen. It's one of the issues that I've come across in my work is it can be difficult for people to listen when you're coming at them in a way where it feels like a foreign language or it doesn't make sense. And you know, Damion alluded to this a bit with, you know, being a curator and coming up with the ways that you're, you know, being able to lean back and say, I get this or I don't. Collin talked about it with, you know, finding the right voice and saying when you don't understand something. But truthfully, when you are authentically approaching something that means something to you and you're going at it with the energy that you bring to the things that you care most about in the world, people can see that, like it's transparent. But along those lines, I think when we distract from our core mission by doing something that we're hoping is disruptive and it misfires, that can often thwart our attempts to actually elevate the cause further. An example would be if I know that I want to make a political stance around an issue, but I want to do so in a provocative way so that people will notice, and I do it in a way that takes them so far away from the original intent of the message that they start to focus on that, then you end up in a place, in a space where you have to start explaining again what it is you're trying to convey. So if we think about the misconstruction of what Collin, Eric, Reed, and Eli Harold's statement was with taking a knee, and how so many people misinterpreted it as being about the flag and the respect for the flag. We dialed it back and we thought, okay, if we were to take this to the 3rd grade level, how would we explain what we're doing and why? And then let's reconstruct it from that stand, and hopefully people will be able to listen a little bit better.
Thank you, Joanne. Hudson?
Great. All right. So I think about this in really particular way. So for Athlete Ally, I am most interested in wins that are within sport. I think those are the areas where athletes have the most leverage. And so I'm trying to always look at sort of this landscape of saying, okay, what is the industry of sport not doing that it could be doing, that as a secondary benefit would be sort of dismantling systems of oppression outside of sport, right? So for example, I think a huge win is like, how do we get human rights more embedded into the bid process of mega sporting events, right? If the World Cup took into consideration the human rights of any host country more explicitly, more proactively, that could go a long way towards affecting change. So number one, it's like trying to look at those opportunities within sport as our campaigns or as our opportunities. Number two, I think it has to be winnable, right? There are many things that we could say, oh, pie in the sky, I would love for this to happen. But if I'm trying to pick a campaign that's too far away from the comfort level of people in positions of power, it's not worth our time. Not to say we don't want to do it. We're not, maybe that's not that is still the long-term goal, but we kind of have to look at what's winnable. Number three, I think it's important that it's time bound. To the extent that we can put a campaign on a clock I think it massively increases the efficacy of that campaign. Now, the great thing about sport is that it's cyclical, so that we know the Final Four is going to come next year. Women's Sports Foundation is going to be ready right at that, as we're going into that tournament. It's time bound, it's specific, it's within a range that, it's winnable, right? So I think that those are three things that are also really important. And then in terms of how then do we articulate the message of it? How do we cultivate or create the message for that campaign? To me, we look at the stated values of the sporting body. So go to the non-discrimination clause, go to the charter, go to whatever their bylaws say. It's within that that is doctrine, that is gospel within sport, right? And if we can take those words and say, okay, you NCAA say that you care about providing a discrimination-free environment for all who attend your championships and events. Interesting, and now we take those words and we apply it in ways that are, with measurable wins that we think we can achieve, time bound, strategic, all of those things that I just said before. So I think the messaging for the campaigns comes directly from the messages that are coming from the sport governing bodies themselves. And then the final piece of this is we need our messengers. We need the right people to be beating the drum to call for that change. And that takes time, that takes trust, that can be really challenging. But, if you get the right, let's say 10 athletes, the right 10 athletes could make anything winnable within sport. And I really believe that. And so it means that you can literally move mountains with very few people if you design a campaign with those kind of parameters in mind.
Thank you, Hudson. Collin.
All right. So I'm going to answer this one a little differently, right? So the question that's being posed around the different ways and methods social change can be pursued, and what do we think sort of the most effective ways of activism and advocacy are, right? We actually, as Rise, asked this question back in 2016. So after Colin Kaepernick took the knee and there was a lot of conversation around protests, we were sort of more aware than the average person that other forms of activism were taking place, but folks weren't really able to identify that. So we spent about a year, right, sort of looking around the news and digging for stuff. And we sort of looked at 225 examples of athlete activism that took place in the latter half of 2016. And we came out with this report called From Protest to Progress, Athlete Activism in 2016. And what we did from those 225 different sort of examples, we discovered that there were 6 categories. So the most popular category, the one that we often think about, is protests, right? It's the most visible. It happens during games. There are a lot of eyes there. But what are these other things that athletes are doing to sort of bring about the change that they want to see? The other 5 categories, as we sort of identified them, were public statements, right? Which include statements that are made during press conferences, that can be tweets, but sort of placing a statement out there around what your stance is on. The next was collective action. So athletes not doing things individually, but working together, right? Whether that be on the same team, that be across teams, across leagues, sort of to Hudson's last point around if the right 10 athletes were to get together, right? We talk about special apparel, right? So it's wearing something, whether that be something like My Cause, My Cleats, a t-shirt that says witness or I can't breathe, right? But really channeling a message, perhaps the most famous being the pink ribbon for breast cancer awareness. Community outreach, which is actually going back and getting into the communities, volunteering, whether that's a Boys and Girls Club and spending your time that way. And then the other one was financial contributions, right? Putting your money where your mouth is, saying, hey, I'm going to provide resources to do the work to sort of achieve this goal. What we found looking at the most impactful of these was that it did not fit in any category, but it really was around what was most multifaceted, right? So what are the ways in which people are working together, right? Collectively acting, but their message is clear via a public statement or some sort of apparel that they're wearing, but they're also working within a co-constructed space. So it's not just players, but they've done something, whether that was sort of, applying some pressure, but now have got buy-in from the league, from coaches, from teams, right? So there is this sort of unified, multi-pronged approach that really taps into the awareness piece, right? That taps into the knowledge piece, that taps into the resources being available, that taps into the now creating a space to have this conversation and move forward, right? So I think the long story short is that we sort of identify these 6 different categories of types of actions that one can take, but the ones that are most effective have elements of each, highlighting and getting to moving progress in the ways in which athletes found important. And a quick example would be JJ Watt, right? When JJ Watt sort of was doing fundraising, that action was not just the donation of money, but then it was the sharing of that on social media, right? Making it public, and then sort of having others join in and saying, oh, here's something I've not even thought about. Here's an issue that wasn't sort of in my conscious, but now that it is, there's something that I can do. And perhaps I'm more passionate than I thought. And maybe it won't be focused there, but I'll take some of that passion and apply it elsewhere. But tons of examples there. Just really wanted to sort of frame it the way that we looked at it from a sort of a research standpoint.
Oh, absolutely. All 3 responses were great. Joanne emphasizing the strategic disruption and the intentionality about the time, space, and context to make sure that messages are received effectively. Hudson talking about within sport, pursuing winnable, specific, time-bound aims with appropriate messengers. And then with Collin talking about the importance of examining different types of advocacy and activism, and how this multifaceted approach is extremely important when we're talking about making progress happen in multiple spaces. So thank you all for your responses. My next question is for Pharlone, Sarah, and Damion. One of the major topics that often goes overlooked within social change efforts is the presence and influence of power dynamics within and across groups and organizations. How can we effectively navigate and manage power dynamics within and across social change coalition efforts? So this comes from not only politicians, which is a very prominent topic across, but also within organizations, the different intersecting identities that leaders and members of these organizations possess, and how that may impact the level of effectiveness of a particular aim. So we'll start with Pharlone, go to Sarah, and then Damion.
Okay. All right. You ready? No. So, I want to start off with I cannot remember the exact name of this amazing feminist, but, the sentiment is everything is political, y'all. It just is. If you don't want it to be, that's okay, but it is. And so, when I think about this question about power dynamics, it reminds me of the way that people react to the comment about everything is political, right? There is power dynamics in everything, right? And I think the most important thing that needs to be done is to acknowledge it, right? Because if you enter into a space and you act like the power dynamics aren't there, then you've already started from the wrong place, right? We can't even really have an honest dialogue when we're pretending like the reason why I'm here is because I'm afraid you might kill me, right? How can there be consent? How can there be consensus if there's fear, right? Power dynamics is something that really can feel controversial, and in a person, it's an embodied experience to not acknowledge it. I would say, one of the greatest comments I've been hearing from this whole entire group is in, calling the thing out. Sarah did a great job of highlighting this for me, and this, concept about addressing the NCAA on what's good, what's really actually happening, not, these rudimentary, not real, these are tangible things, and we're asking you what's up, right? And I think, when we address things full on, right, and give people the notice that hey, I'm about to call you out, right? I just want you to know, I'm putting you on notice. this is what's about to go down, right? And using your power, using your leverage to make change, right? Those are examples to me of really addressing power dynamics. And the truth is, if we don't address the power dynamics, all we're doing is perpetuating inequities. All we're doing is acting like it's not there, right? And shame, I hate to use that word. I hope someone else who's going to answer this question has a better word, but shame is truly one of the best tools for addressing power dynamics, right? Because if I can shame you into changing, right, that means now you've invited me into the discussion because you feel some type of way about the fact that I called you out, I put you on Front Street, right? If I hadn't done that, then all of these people, all of these issues wouldn't even be a part of this conversation right now. And so sometimes we all have to take a moment to think about how we can possibly use shame to get someone to do something that they need to do, otherwise wouldn't do.
Thank you. Thank you. Sarah.
Yeah, so I think I probably have a slightly different angle on this question, but I even looked at it, I'm looking at it from the perspective of even within all of the organizations that are pushing for change, there are often power dynamics, right? The Women's Sports Foundation will not achieve gender equity in sports without men joining us, right? And there are power dynamics, and we need to make sure that, understanding that we can't make change on our own, right? The marginalized group that is asking for change, that is pushing, demanding change, we need others to join us in that fight. But I think recognizing when you're in that instance and you do have that position of power, to recognize that and make room at the table, right? Make room at the table for marginalized folks. Make sure that the voices that need to be at the table, that need to be included, are included. And if you're in that position of power, using it for good, right? And recognizing that and the dynamics at play, often either within organizations, between organizations, within the greater social justice movement. And I think one good and recent example, and Hudson alluded to it earlier, right, is this push for trans inclusion in sport. The Women's Sports Foundation is not an LGBT organization, but so frequently right now we are seeing protecting women's sports as the reason being invoked for why trans kids should be banned from sports, right? And so we recognize, as the Women's Sports Foundation, number one, that's a terrible reason, right? That's a terrible thing to do. But we are an expert on women and girls in sport, right? We have an authority and a voice to speak to this issue, right? So it is on us. Our mantra, all girls, all women, all sports, we mean it, right? Trans girls and women are included in those that we serve through sport. And we believe it's critical that everyone has access to sport because we know the benefits that it provides. So recognizing that we have a position of influence within the women's sports space and using that to use our voice to support others in that fight, right? And working alongside those who have been doing this work for so long, partnering with organizations like Athlete Ally and many others, but making sure, that you're using your voice and your expertise to further the mission, but making sure that if you're in that position of power, you're bringing other folks along and making space. And if you're joining a conversation that maybe you haven't been a part of the whole time, making sure that you're looking to other experts in the field and not just stepping in blindly and asserting your own, influence and power, but really coordinating and collaborating across organizations is so critical.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Damion.
I think we're in an interesting moment when it comes to thinking about power dynamics in social change. And I just want to sort of in some ways think about it from the standpoint of the Black Lives Matter movement as opposed to the Civil Rights movement, the Civil Rights movement has these sort of authoritative figures, Dr. King, Ralph Abernathy, and others, who really chart out a path that others are following and really sort of trying to create a situation where people are adhering to a core set of practices and ways of engaging this struggle, versus the Black Lives Matter movement, which has been very intent that they on saying that they are a leaderless movement, that you want these local movements to sort of articulate their own needs, their own desires, to pick out which battles that they want to fight. And I think we're at a moment, particularly when you think about the younger generations, where they've had tremendous success thus far in the last 7 or 8 years in terms of changing some laws, bringing attention to some of these social justice issues and changing public opinion without having this strong, dominant national leadership, without having this 1 or 2 voices who sort of, in many ways, control what the narrative is. And although it's been highly successful to this point, I think we're at a really important moment where we'll see whether this new form of leadership and sharing of power is sustainable. And so I think we're at a fascinating moment, and scholars like myself and future generations are really going to look at this moment and see, are we at a moment where things really shift in terms of those power dynamics? And I think Dr. Lapchick said it quite well earlier when he talked about the power of the camera, the power of someone with an Instagram or Twitter following to change people's perspectives and how they see something based on a tweet or a video that they've shot, and the power that gives them as well. So I think we're in an interesting moment to see how these dynamics play out moving forward.
No, thank you all 3 excellent remarks. I mean, just to summarize, Pharlone talked about how there's power dynamics and everything is political, and the importance of using shaming in a strategic way to ignite power arrangements to be changed. And then Sarah talking about the importance of using your power for good. So once again, this theme of acknowledging and recognizing power, but using it for good in promoting inclusivity, coalition building, and cross-cultural collaboration. And then Damion with the emphasis on agreeing on a core set of practices and the idea that leadership in power dynamics can look different across different eras and across different contexts, and the power that can come from leaderless movements, as well as other more centralized leadership approaches. So I want to thank you all for your insightful remarks. I'll pass it back over to my colleague, Dr. McGarry, for question 5.
Thanks, Joey. And I'm paying attention to time as well. So I'm going to shift this a little bit. I think we've started to get into this next question already in the question that you all just answered. So I wanted to go back to something, 2 things. One thing that Sarah said about the power dynamic between organizations, and you used the example of trans kids playing sports will hurt women's sports. And so like a necessity for organizations to work together and bring their expertise together in order to speak out and make change in these particular issues. And then the other thing that Damion said just before here about leadership that wants to share power, that is looking not necessarily to take credit individually, but looking to spread that the leadership across multiple individuals. And so I'm going to just come back to these couple of comments. And in particular, I don't know, Sarah, if you wanted to say anything more about working across organizations to bring the strengths of those organizations together. And then also was going to see if Hudson wanted to weigh in when we specifically are talking about trans rights.
Sure. So, and I think it's probably twofold, right? It's about working across organizations and making sure, WSF, we see ourselves as a convener, right? So making sure that we're convening the right folks and having the right voices in the room to look at intersectional identities, to make sure that we are advocating for all and including other organizations working collaboratively. But I think the other thing too that's really important is making sure that even if it is an organization that is focused on a particular subset of social justice, right, whether it be race, gender, LGBTQ population, it's also about recognizing the intersectional identities within your particular movement, right? And so one thing that comes to mind for the Women's Sports Foundation is, yes, we're pushing for gender equity in sports, but if we just blindly push for gender equity in sports for women and girls, we're going to perpetuate what we've already seen, right? And so we know, going back to the research that I mentioned earlier, we know the primary beneficiaries of Title IX, right? Title IX is lauded, has had great effects for women and girls and advancing opportunities and participation. But if you actually take a step back and look at the data, the primary beneficiaries have been suburban white girls, right? So girls of color, girls in urban and rural centers are being left behind. So if we just look broadly and say we're pushing for gender equity, we're likely going to perpetuate more of the same, right? So we need to be really intentional about making sure that within our movements, we're also looking at intersectional identities, right? And investing in girls of color, making sure that we're speaking out for LGBTQ girls and women, right? And making sure that it's not just a broad, we believe in gender equity, because then we're just going to end up perpetuating a lot of the things that we've already seen. And so making sure that even within movements, we are looking at those intersectional identities, girls with disabilities, and making sure that we really focus where the most marginalized within that community need help and need advocacy.
I would just piggyback and say, I think a huge component of success for all of us is that we need to continue building a bigger tent. And so you can only build that bigger tent when you collaborate and partner and support the work of other organizations. So, at Athlete Ally, although our mission, our vision, our strategy is very LGBTQ specific, we've organized athletes to overturn the hijab ban in international basketball, help increase the number of women in FIFA governance, campaigns that were not at all led by Athlete Ally, but we have access to a network of athletes who are willing to use their platform in a whole variety of ways. And so, anybody has a campaign and they want help putting it in front of athletes, I'm here for it. I can't promise that they'll say yes, but I think that's how we get more people to, we build that trust, we build that community. And so that then when that moment comes, when I need athletes to stand up for trans athletes, well, guess what? It's not the 200 athletes who are members of the LGBTQ community with whom we work, but it's 500 athletes who have been kind of marching shoulder to shoulder with us on so many other fights. And Athlete Ally, we've been working really closely with the Women's Sports Foundation because they do have an athlete network that is being whose name is being invoked to attack trans youth. And so, for us, it's been, hey, how can Athlete Ally help work with the Women's Sports Foundation, work with all of their athletes to make sure that education is, any questions are being asked and answered so that everybody can be the best, allies and messengers and champions possible. So those partnerships are critical. And, we try to do our best to show up so that others show up for us.
Thank you both. And Damion, then coming back to you, obviously you all are leaders in your respective organizations, and that comment that you made about Black Lives Matter and the ability to, or desire even to share power across leaders and how that can support the fight against systemic racism, systemic homophobia, several of the issues that we've talked about today. I wondered if you had any additional thoughts that you wanted to add about the role of leaders and leadership in systemic change.
Sure. I want to talk about one of the challenges of making that happen. And I was really inspired by something that Sarah said or acknowledged about the beneficiaries of Title IX. And so one of the challenges that a lot of African Americans have in terms of building these big tent coalitions is that often they're not the beneficiaries of that. And so And so I just want to acknowledge the difficulty of building that trust, of building a sense of awareness that this is the history. And so I think that's one of the main goals, is that as we try to build these movements that are going to move together and reinforce each other, we can't come at these efforts without acknowledging what's happened in the past that has made this much more difficult than we would like it to be.
Joey, that might have just been the first of the next question with closing remarks and takeaways. So I'm going to turn things over to you to bring us home here for the end.
Absolutely. We want to thank everyone for this outstanding stakeholder panel. It's really amazing how much information can be shared within 90 minutes. I mean, this was very incredible. I took tremendous amount of notes myself and learned a tremendous amount from each of you in terms of the work that you're doing with your respective organizations. What we have here, we only have one question in the chat that I'm sure there are more questions, but as it was mentioned earlier, everyone's social media platforms and websites have been shared for all of our attendees. We certainly encourage all of you to be engaged. When Sarah sent out the link about the petition, I signed it on the spot. So that was an example of immediate responses. So thank you for sharing that. The question that's in the chat for Joanne from Megan reads, do you think the NFL will be able to change the way they are perceived by the general public with their newest initiative, even though Kaepernick is still being left out?
That's a big question. Authenticity. I mean, the league has been a reactive league versus a prophylactic league. If we can get ahead of things and start to make real change, then we stand a better chance of actually making a difference. Right now, it feels so reactionary. It feels so contrived that until we get to some degree of authenticity, I don't see how anything changes. And you can throw money at a problem, but if you don't have direction with where you're throwing that money, and if you aren't actually asking the stakeholders and saying, where would you like this to go? How should we be addressing this? I mean, systemic racism, all this stuff is so intense right now. And I feel like it's happening in a silo. I have this ongoing sort of joke I share with some of my clients, that I have an Ocean's 11 moment in fantasy that would happen where a bunch of these incredible, intelligent, thoughtful, driven men who have been at the forefront of this movement and have stood up and sacrificed or risked their careers to stand up for the right thing. I want them to come in and own a team and walk into that meeting and just start to shake things up. And then I think we'll see real change. Hard.
Thank you, Joanne. And as we conclude, I'll just throw a couple takeaway points for everybody. In summary, authenticity, building a bigger tent, data-informed strategizing, acknowledge and leverage power, make room and center the experiences of those most disadvantaged, bridge the gap between non-sport centric activists and advocacy organizations and sport organizations and athletes, and understanding the historical context that leads to our social, political, socio-cultural realities today. So I want to thank all of our outstanding panelists for your expertise, your insights, and I will pass it over to Eli Wolf.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. It was an excellent conversation, really building the momentum. We do have a few minutes for our wrap up. I'm going to turn it over actually to our wonderful colleague and our fearless home and leader, Erin, with the Ali Center. And just to thank Erin, of course, for hosting us and for having us and collaborating and leveraging the platform. Also, Ashley as well. I'll maybe share her story, but yeah, I'll turn it over to you, Erin.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ashley will be, well, Ashley, do you want to just say a quick hello? I told you you didn't have to say anything today, but Ashley is the newest member of our team at the Alley Center. So why not say a quick hello? It'd be
Sure,
wonderful
of
for everyone to
course.
meet you.
Of course. It's been a pleasure to sit and listen to all of the expertise and to sit in all the power today. It's been really great. My name is Ashley Hazley. I am starting today the Senior Manager of Programming and Community Engagement for the Muhammad Ali Center. So I'm super excited for all of the possibilities to collaborate and support and support collective action from everyone here and everyone who draws power from others. So yeah.
Thanks, Ashley. And I just sincerely want to thank all of our partners, of course, Mary and Eli and Yannick, and all of our panelists who participated today and earlier with our athlete panel. Those of you who took the time today to participate, to ask questions, to be a part of this very important dialogue. Mary started her comments this morning saying that she was certain Muhammad was smiling down at us, and I would completely agree. I think when we talk about Muhammad's life, we talk about living in Muhammad's legacy. We are talking about a call to action, right? His life dictates to us that it is our turn to take up his torch and to figure out how each and every one of us can go out and make a difference. I always like to say Muhammad was exceptional, Muhammad was extraordinary, but Muhammad was not an anomaly. There are many Muhammad Ali's in some way out there leading the charge for social change, for racial justice, for making and building a more just and equitable world, inclusive world for all. So I hope through your participation today, those of you who were with us on the webinar, those who will be reached more broadly as we're able to share this wonderful panel out on our website, that you are inspired to figure out in whatever corner of the earth that you occupy how you can go out and shift and make the world a better place. Thank you to all of our organizations who participated, our panelists, the broader community who was with us today. Please know that the Muhammad Ali Center wants to be a partner and ally in your efforts, so do not hesitate to reach out to me, to the center more broadly, if we can ever be of support or to engage in your work. Let me turn it over to Mary now to say your final words.
Yeah, thank you. Wow, holy cow. This has been an amazing afternoon. You know, I was, and I mean the whole afternoon, all the sessions, but this one now in particular, I love the conversations about intersectionality, because I think that an allyship, I think we can't overlook that. So important, but the intersectionalities that we all have. But I also, you know, coming from, I'm a sport management professor, so also hearing these underpinnings of governance and also business acumen and business perspectives that make some of these things happen, I thought was really, really great. And then I always, Damion, I always love when you bring the historical perspective. You know, I'm a professor. I love stories, and the part of history I love is the story. You always bring it together. A couple panels that I've been on with you on. So thank you for doing that as well. But everybody, what a great afternoon! I think our attendees really will walk away with a lot of power in their heads today, and I think that's great. So thank you to everybody, all the moderators, all the panelists, everybody who was out there listening today. Thanks for being here today, and again, Erin, always great hosting things with the Ali Center. So, Eli, I'm going to let you wrap it up.
Yeah, no, just to say thank you all. And I guess one of the things I wanted to point to is just this kind of national, international conversation, you know, giving permission, allowing for it to happen, you know, building the momentum, and really seeing that we are gaining, you know, steam, gaining momentum, gaining action, you know, the mobilizing together. And so perhaps today, you know, just helps to amplify that, helps to inspire. I think we've all been really inspired and motivated and just engaging with so much that's been happening, not only today, but just overall. But again, I think it really just shows, I know we oftentimes talk about the power and how if we all just kind of collectively work and mobilize. And I feel like that's really happened here, you know, for today and for the momentum we're having over the next, weeks and months, and the Olympics, Paralympics coming up, with everything that's happening in our world, the time is really happening now. So yeah, I just wanted to say, on behalf of everyone, thank you all for coming together. This panel, so amazing. I'm just sort of speechless here from our panel here with the stakeholders and also our athlete panel. Just it really helped to make the case. It really says this is important and this is here. It's here to stay. This is essential. So yeah, I think maybe I'll turn it back to Erin for just a closing and just to say thank you again.
I don't think I could say anything more other than thank you to everyone. Thank you so much. This panel, the panel earlier, will be available through the Muhammad Ali Center website. So if you'd like to share it out to anyone, if you'd like to use it as a resource, it'll be widely available to you. Give us just a couple of days, a little bit into next week, and we'll have it up. Please don't hesitate to reach out if we can ever be of support to any of your efforts. Thank you all so much, and we look forward to continued allyship and conversation and action.
Yeah.
Have a good day.
Thanks, everybody. See y'all.
Take care. Thank you all.